Hello everyone, welcome back to another Telemachus Devlog. It has been, yikes, 6 months since my last upload on this. To be fair, I've been working on other projects, and I did say that last year I wanted to focus on learning to make games. Nevertheless, we are overdue. So I am going to be sharing two things in today's video. There is a gameplay prototype I'm working towards. There's also a story prototype I'm working towards. We'll talk about both, a little bit of narrative planning as well. It's been a while, so let's start with a quick recap. What is Telemachus? This is a racing roguelike RPG thing. Okay, so Telemachus is a story, first and foremost, and all the genre and everything else comes from that story. So I'm not picking a game that I like and saying I'm going to make something similar to this. I'm picking a story I want to tell and making a game around it. The story I'm going to tell is about this guy named Telemachus who lived in ancient Rome and decided to jump into the Roman Colosseum trying to end the games. He died in that effort, but he also succeeded. Story goes, the last drop of blood to dry in the Colosseum was the blood of a free man who gave it willingly on behalf of those who were condemned to die. And that was it. After that day, there were no more games. So that to me is a story worth telling. This is what I want to use as the linear portion of my gameplay narrative. So if you think of the RPG as a series of loops, I'm going to be borrowing that concept. I'm going to have a mostly linear main story, but around that I'm going to be having this loop of going into combat, coming out of combat, having a story progression, interactions. Think of a small RPG style town where you will be having these interactions and growth, but then you're also going to be going in, you're going to be racing, either winning, losing, or even dying. If you die, you get a new character. If you win or lose a race, you get to continue the story of this one character you're telling. You're going to be having multiple of these loops for however many characters you play while the main story is progressing. So it's not the story of your personal interactions with this guy Telemachus. It is the story of the way the world is changing, and you get to be a minor protagonist in that through one or more of the characters that you're playing. Inside of that loop, you're going to have the smaller loop of individual races. You can win, you can lose, or you can die in a race, and if you die in a race, new character. If you don't, next race with the same character. For that smaller core loop, the inspirations are Star Fox and F-Zero, and so you're going to be having these segments where you are primarily driving and segments where you are primarily engaged in combat with other contestants, and it's going to be an ebb and flow as you're going back and forth, doing multiple laps. For an example track, take a figure 8, but elongate it more to make it more like a Q-tip, you'd have this section where you can be combat racing both against oncoming traffic and the people you're traveling with, and then on the other side you are having this slower traditional racing. So hopefully that gives it a good ebb and flow within the race, which then will supplement the larger cycles of high intensity, low intensity, as you're going back and forth between the racing, drive combat, and the lower intensity of story beats and resting and conversation, that kind of stuff. So that is the recap where I've been. You may notice this is actually a bit more fleshed out than it was in the previous video, and that's the first part of the update. Is I've been working on the main design doc for the game. What is this game going to look like? Essentially this video and that part I just shared. The other thing I've been working on is both game jam prototypes and story prototypes. So I'm going to be looking at both of those, and the goal going forward is going to be to do a first playable alpha version. I'm going to be coming at it from both angles though. The one side is working on the 20 games challenge, making Mario Kart and then F-Zero and then Star Fox, and then rolling that forward into a game prototype. So this one is Mario Kart. This is the first one I'm going to be working on. And I already went through 4 different vehicle controllers. As you can tell, it still isn't great. I'm going to be doing more work before I release my 20 Games Challenge video on this. I have been going through a lot of various control schemes, trying different things. This one actually uses a rolling ball simulation and then just has the car mesh on top of it. I don't know if this is how the actual game would work. My guess is probably not, but going through multiple control schemes has helped me to decide what works and what doesn't work. So yeah, there's still a lot of work to do on the racing, figuring out a gameplay prototype side. I'm in the very early parts of this, but I at least have a racing game of some sort made to some degree. If you're curious, this is actually a bowling theme I decided to do for the racetrack on this one. It's going to be a combination of Rainbow Road and Banshee Boardwalk. So keep an eye out for that video. That will be its own thing. There is still a lot to do on the gameplay side. With that said, this is a small game with a big story, and I'm not really that worried about getting this done. The bigger problem for me is the story itself. So I started trying to think through this, and I was really struggling with writer's block, so this might be silly, but I started playing City Skylines, and specifically I started making the capital city where all these events take place. I started in the present day. I've put in about 120 years so far, and the goal is to have a extended universe and a real history to draw from. So if a character maybe tells you about the community they came from, where a company built a dam, but that dam never fully filled up because their water evaporated too quickly, and suddenly they're paying for this resource that used to be free, that's not just a story I made up, that's a story that actually happened in this world. And so those kind of things, I hope, will provide a really rich narrative and make it feel more alive. So that's definitely a background task that I'm doing. That's not the main focus, but I thought it'd be worth mentioning as I'm doing a devlog because I did spend a number of hours on this already. One other narrative element I've been working on is not necessarily the story itself, but a story engine to enable me to write and work in non-linear narratives. So this actually is a tool. I didn't create this one. This is called Whiskers. Somebody else made it, but it is made in Godot, and this is inspiring me to work on my own tool. So these are nodes you can lay out. You can do dialogue. You can do all sorts of different things, and this is just Godot's graph node. It's a standard built-in tool. My goal is going to be to take a tool like this and to create essentially a story editor. So just like a lot of games have a level editor where you can open it up and edit it within the game, I want to do that with the story. I'm really inspired by a story I heard from the developers of Myst, where that game was made in HyperCard, which was essentially a really old version of PowerPoint, more or less. And they would playtest their game, and as people hit a point where they're confused or they had questions, they would just pause the game, make a modification, and then resume right where they were. So that's going to be my goal, is to do the same thing with the narrative. And I'm going to be starting with these graph nodes. I'm going to be making essentially a text adventure version of the entire story where you can play through just the narrative. Everything else will be simulated. And then I'll just be doing rapid iteration on the story and getting feedback. So I'm going to work on it from two sides, eventually leading to a main prototype. That's going to be a while down the road though, so I hope to get my next devlog out in less than another 6 months. Let me know what you think of all this. As always, love getting feedback. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.